I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and this is episode 10, titled Alaric and the Barbarian Migrations. In this episode you will learn how and why the Barbarian Migrations towards the Roman Empire began, the Gothic Crisis, Alaric's leadership in all of this, and who the Vandals, Alans, and Suebi were. Migration period explained. This episode marks the beginning of the Barbarian Migrations in the Iberian Peninsula, within the context of large-scale migrations across Eurasia. This occurred during late antiquity, a term used to refer to the period between the crisis of the 3rd century and the late Roman Empire until the Muslim conquest of the Visigothic kingdom starting in the early 8th century. In academia, it is common not to view the barbarian kingdoms that emerged with the fall of the Western Roman Empire as a radical change from the late Roman Empire. The institutions, society, and economy did not undergo dramatic changes with the Visigothic kingdom because, like most historical processes, change is gradual, and one does not go to bed in antiquity and wake up in the Middle Ages. In the past, people spoke of barbarian invasions, but historians now prefer to talk about migrations and settlements. This shift is not about political correctness, but reflects that many barbarian arrivals and settlements happened with Roman permission, involving entire families, not just warrior men. Additionally, it is inaccurate to speak only of Germanic migrations. There were also Iranian and steppe peoples from Eastern Europe and Central Asia. By the way, just to be clear, when we refer to barbarians, we mean non-Roman foreign peoples, who mostly did not speak Latin and were not Catholics. Not barbarians in the sense of being savages, although some Romans certainly view them that way. The barbarians who later settled in the Roman Empire had been in contact with Romans for centuries as neighbors, since most borders are permeable. Well, except for the borders of North Korea, of course. Apart from occasional skirmishes and wars, the Romans and barbarians traded, and the empire intervened in the politics of the Germanic chiefdoms by supporting one leader against another or sending gifts. Similar to how the ancient Chinese dealt with the nomadic peoples of Mongolia to prevent them from uniting and turning against them. Due to this context, barbarian migrations also occurred in the 2nd and 3rd centuries due to climatic, demographic, and economic factors. Due to this context, barbarian migrations also occurred in the 2nd and 3rd centuries due to climatic, demographic, and economic factors. During this time, the Roman army began a process of barbarization, replacing Roman recruits with immigrants from Northern and Eastern Europe. At the same time, these foreigners adopted some Roman customs, as happened with the Romanization of the Hispanians. This barbarization of the army, seen by some as a fifth column in the western part of the empire, happened because Roman citizens were unwilling to serve voluntarily and preferred to pay higher taxes for the state to hire barbarians. This was because, since everyone had Roman citizenship and there were no new conquests to make, the army was no longer a means of enrichment and upward mobility as it was during the Republic and early Roman Empire. The migrations we focus on today began in the late 4th century, partly due to the arrival of the Huns, a mysterious group of nomadic peoples. The Huns likely came from Mongolia and Central Asia, expanding westward and destroying everything in their path, while also incorporating new peoples into their coalition. The devastation caused by the Huns created a domino effect, pushing the Germanic, Iranian, and Slavic peoples into the Roman Empire. The barbarians thought they would be safer from the Huns in the Roman provinces and formed large military confederations to have greater bargaining power with Rome. This story may sound familiar because in Game of Thrones, the White Walkers, who will be here the Huns, forced the wildlings beyond the wall to unite and push into the lands of Westeros, aka the Roman Empire. Historian Guy Halsall offers a different perspective, highlighting the interdependence between the barbarian chiefdoms and the Roman Empire as the main cause for the migrations. As patronages and gifts from Rome ceased to arrive, the barbarian elites had reasons to enter into conflict with the empire. In fact, this was the reason for other wars between Rome and the barbarians, as seen with the Gothic War of the 3rd century. These great migrations were one of the main causes of the disappearance of the western part of the Roman Empire at the end of the 5th century, though not the only cause. The empire had internal weaknesses, and the transformations of the 3rd century made it more fragmented socially and economically, making it harder to manage. The barbarian warriors replaced the Roman political and military apparatus through force and a series of coincidences, and with support from the church and provincial Roman elites who had increasingly different interests. As you will see throughout these and the following episodes, the fall of the Western Roman Empire was not an abrupt and unexpected collapse, but a gradual and avoidable process that led to the creation of various barbarian kingdoms. The origin of the Goths. The great barbarian migrations towards the Roman Empire began far from Hispania when the Danube frontier was breached in 376. So let's first discuss the Goths, a barbarian people who played a significant role in the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the history of Spain. Where did the Goths originally come from? The traditional theory is that they came from present-day Sweden in Scandinavia, then moved to what is now Eastern Germany and Poland. This is why, in an ecclesiastical council of the 14th century, a Castilian delegation and a Swedish delegation debated over who was more Gothic. The Castilian representative claimed that the lazy and unambitious Goths stayed in Sweden, while the heroic ones migrated to Spain. However, the idea that they came from Sweden might be a myth. What we do know for sure is that the Goths spoke an East Germanic language, and from the 3rd century onwards, most migrated to the Pontica steppe, in modern-day Ukraine, seeking warmer and more fertile lands. There they interacted with Eurasian nomads like the Scythians, and adopted cavalry-based military tactics. The importance of cavalry changed their social and political structures, and in this multi-ethnic region, the Gothic identity began to form. The migration to the Pontica steppe by the Goths and other Germanic peoples caused disorder and led to conflicts with Rome, most notably the Gothic Wars of the 3rd century. In these wars, the Goths were defeated, and traditionally, this is said to have caused the division of the Goths into two large confederations, the Tervingi and the Greuthangi. However, most historians today believe that the Tervingi were the most powerful group, but there were also several groups of non-Tervingian Goths, including the Greuthangi. It's also very much questioned whether identifying the Tervingi with the Visigoths and the Greuthangi with the Ostrogoths is accurate, as Visigothic ranks included Tervingi, Greuthangi, Goths from smaller chiefdoms, and even Alans and Huns. So, although the Tervingi might have been the majority in the mix, the Visigothic identity formed and evolved with these multi-ethnic components. The Tervingi settled in the Danube plains west of the Dniester River and maintained close relations with Rome. Most Tervingian Goths converted to Arian Christianity in the late 4th century, thanks to Bishop Ulfilas, who translated the Gospels and much of the Bible into the Gothic language. The Tervingian Confederation was led by a kind of judge or king who had authority over other chieftains. In contrast, the Greuthangi settled farther east in Ukraine, so we know less about them. But before moving on to the next section, remember to subscribe to New History of Spain as a podcast or on YouTube for more extra content aside from the chronological series. And you can support the show on Patreon. Thank you. The Gothic Crisis. The Huns appeared like a storm, defeating and incorporating many groups of Alans and Greuthangian Goths. The Huns took advantage of the internal weakness of the Goths, who suffered because trade with the Romans had been restricted and they had stopped receiving gifts after Emperor Valens' campaigns in the late 360s, which devastated Gothic territory. Moreover, the Romans often pitted barbarian groups against each other to weaken them, But this time they miscalculated and perhaps weakened the Goths too much, causing a civil war among Gothic factions. Unintentionally, the Romans had empowered an even more formidable enemy than the Goths. As a result, a large faction of Goths crossed the Danube River in 376 to enter the Roman Empire. This happened with Roman help, as Emperor Valens wanted more soldiers for his campaigns against the Persians, and by settling the Goths in abandoned lands, the state could increase tax revenues. Roman soldiers were supposed to disarm and register the Goths, but so many entered the empire that Roman authorities were overwhelmed. Soon after, the Romans faced a problem. They lacked the logistics to feed all these people, and corrupt local authorities exploited their misery by inflating food prices. To make matters worse, the troops stationed on the Danube couldn't prevent groups of Grauthangian Goths, Huns, and Alans from also crossing the river, and all of them took the opportunity to plunder the Balkans with impunity. Emperor Valens and the best troops of the Eastern Roman Empire faced all these barbarian groups in the Battle of Adrianople. But unfortunately, the emperor died in battle, and many of the best Roman officers and soldiers also perished. The disaster was colossal. Historian Jose Sotochica demonstrated that it was not a battle of a decaying empire doomed to lose to vigorous barbarians. The causes of the defeat lay in Valens' poor leadership and mistakes in assessing enemy forces. Only after 3 years of hard campaigning could Emperor Theodosius defeat and subdue the barbarians who had entered the Roman Empire. The Goths settled within the empire and were granted lands to farm in Thrace and Macedonia. Given their large numbers, entire military units composed exclusively of Goths were created. The defeated Goths served Emperor Theodosius because, ironically, the Romans needed the barbarian troops to protect the Danube frontier from other barbarians. However, despite Theodosius' relative control over the Goths, there were many tensions between them and the Romans. On one hand, the Romans remembered the wave of plundering and violence caused by the Goths, while the Goths knew they were used as cannon fodder in battles. After Theodosius' death, with two minors ascending to the thrones of the two parts of the Roman Empire, chaos erupted again, and a power struggle ensued. Stilicho and Alaric's Visigoths. As we saw in episode 9, Late Roman Empire and Christianization of Hispania, Theodosius left his son Honorius as emperor of the Western Roman Empire, under the regency of General Stilicho, who was of Roman and Vandal ancestry. Stilicho controlled the armies of the West and even some of the East, making him the most powerful man in the empire, while another region and enemy of Stilicho controlled the East. Here enters Alaric, one of the most famous barbarians in history. Alaric's origins are obscure and we don't have any evidence to consider him of royal lineage. What is known is that he married into the Balti dynasty by becoming the son-in-law of the last Tervingian ruler. Contemporary sources make it clear that Alaric commanded the barbarian men assigned to him, both Goths and non-Goths, debunking the idea that he was the king of a noble lineage leading his nation on the move. The fact that he led Goths but also people of other origins is very important, because what we call Visigoths is merely a faction of a multi-ethnic group, predominantly Gothic and Germanic, led by Alaric and his successors. Over time they incorporated more Goths, other barbarians, and even Roman captives and renegades. That said, Alaric first appears leading a regiment of Goths loyal to Theodosius. Although he was not the only Gothic leader serving the Romans, he was the most willing to rebel against the Roman Empire. Alaric was very unhappy because he had not received the military command he desired, and his subordinates were also discontent because they were only used as cannon fodder. Thus, in 395, Alaric's rebellion began by sacking Macedonia, while the Huns were attacking Asia Minor, leaving the east defenseless since some troops were in Italy under Stilicho's control. The strong men of the east defeated Alaric, but did not eliminate him because he wanted to use him against his arch-enemy, Stilicho. Stilicho aspired to control the entire empire, and for the moment wanted to annex the province of Illyria, in the Western Balkans, which were ruled by the Eastern Emperor. But the region of the East convinced his emperor to order Stilicho to withdraw from Illyria and give back the Eastern troops stationed in Italy. Surprisingly, Stilicho obeyed, probably to demonstrate his loyalty. Meanwhile, Alaric's Goths continued to wreak havoc in the Balkans until Alaric received the title of Magister Militum, or top general of Illyria, which finally allowed his troops and their families to receive food and a stable salary. This continued until a wave of violence against the Goths erupted in Constantinople and other parts of the East. It is unclear if Alaric was dismissed or what happened, but with his position at risk and his army possibly losing the necessary supplies to survive, Alaric's Goths attacked Italy in 401. Stilicho had ordered the withdrawal of most troops from Britannia and northern Gaul, which were meant to protect the Rhine frontier from barbarians like the Vandals, Suebi, and Alans. Thus, Stilicho had to hurry to end the campaign there and send troops to Italy, where he ultimately repelled Alaric's Gothic attacks successfully. It seems that Alaric and Stilicho reached an agreement, and Alaric's depleted Goths were stationed in the region of Pannonia, roughly in present-day Western Hungary. The crossing of the Rhine. The Huns continued migrating westward and incorporating other peoples into their hordes, as some saw the Huns as an alternative to Roman power after Rome's tributes and gifts stopped arriving. Many who did not join the Huns felt pressured to move into Roman territory. This was the case of a Gothic chieftain named Radagaisus, who led a diverse group of barbarians numbering 100,000 people, of whom 20,000 were warriors. Radagaisus and his great army descended upon northern Italy and besieged Florence. Stilicho had to withdraw even more troops from the Rhine frontier to face the large invading force, and he eventually defeated Radagaisus' army and killed its leader. Despite this victory, the stability of the Roman Empire was increasingly compromised. The empire's foreign policy at the time was a complete disaster. There were not enough soldiers protecting the Rhine and the new frontiers, and no classic divide and conquer tactics were used to prevent strong barbarian groups from emerging. It is evident that the Roman state was no longer effective in that regard, as they allowed the Huns or someone like Radagaisus to form a formidable power. Meanwhile, without any foreign policy against such threats, Stilicho remained fixated on demanding the right to rule over more provinces from the Eastern Roman Empire, perhaps to appoint Alaric as Magister Militum of Illyria again and turn him into an ally. Due to the wars against the barbarians, Stilicho and his troops were decimated, and the state apparatus and Roman military presence in Germania, northern Gaul, and Britannia had largely disappeared. With these territories unprotected, barbarians like the Saxons and Heruli could launch attacks without opposition. Knowing that few troops were guarding the Rhine frontier, the barbarians on the other side of the river were ready to cross it. The breaking of the Rhine frontier occurred before Stilicho could secure Alaric's help to face the threat. On December 31, 406, a large coalition of Vandals, Suebi, Alans, and other barbarian peoples crossed the Rhine River and began ravaging Gaul, modern-day France. Some authors date this event to December 31 of the previous year, but that seems unlikely considering the documentary evidence and the fact that, if so, Radagaisus would still be alive and well. In Gaul, the Rhine coalition fought against the Franks, who at that time were allies of the Romans. In the Battle of Mainz, the king of the Vandals died, and the Vandals and Suebi were almost defeated, but the Alans arrived with their cavalry just in time to save the situation and achieve a great victory. Overall, the barbarians encountered little organized resistance and succeeded in plundering a defenseless Gaul. A few years after crossing the Rhine, most of them crossed the Pyrenees in the autumn of 409, but we will see that in the next episode. Who were the Vandals, Suebi, and Alans? Before continuing with the story, it is important to know a bit about the peoples of the Rhine coalition. Let's start with the Alans, the most mysterious group that crossed the Pyrenees in 409. There are very few literary and archaeological sources about them, and only those who stayed in Gaul have left some place names. This is not surprising considering that they soon disappeared as an independent group. It is estimated that about 30,000 Alans crossed the Pyrenees, including warriors and their families. What we do know is that the Alans were a confederation of Iranian steppe peoples originating from the Caucasus Mountains between the Black and Caspian Seas. As a steppe confederation, the Alans were not inclined to agriculture or settling in one region. Their main activities were livestock breeding, herding, hunting, and of course, raiding. Their way of life made them a warrior people. So much so that the greatest honor for an Alan man was to die on the battlefield. And the most valued war trophy was the enemy's hair, which they used to adorn their horses. Chronicler Isidore of Seville said that the Alans felt tired and depressed when they did not have a horse. As steppe riders, the Alans excelled in using bows and heavy cavalry, influencing the Germanic peoples to value these elements more. The Alans who crossed the Rhine in 406 split into those who remained in Gaul and served the Romans, and those who entered the Iberian Peninsula. It is important to note that all barbarian peoples, including the Visigoths, changed through their contacts with the Romans, a process we call ethnogenesis. This means they developed a new identity and underwent transformations that defined them as a distinct people. The long migrations and their alliances or conflicts with the Romans led the barbarians to develop greater group cohesion, different degrees of Romanization, and increased social hierarchies. Additionally, the election of warrior leaders gradually gave way to hereditary monarchies among some Germanic or steppe peoples, and these changes accelerated even more when the barbarians settled within the Roman Empire. Continuing with the barbarians who entered Hispania in 409, we have the Vandals, who came from Scandinavia and northern Poland. They were initially divided into two independent groups, the Silingi Vandals and the Hasdingi Vandals. The Silingi Vandals later lived north of what's now the Czech Republic, while the Hasdingi Vandals lived in Hungary and Romania. The Vandals were by far the most numerous barbarian group to cross the Pyrenees in 409, with 80,000 to 100,000 people, of whom about 20,000 were soldiers. Unlike the pagan Alans, most Vandals were Arian Christians, like the Visigoths at that time. Arianism is a branch of Christianity that rejects the Trinity, the idea that God is represented in three distinct forms: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Arians argued that Jesus was not a manifestation of God, and thus Arianism was condemned as heresy at the Council of Nicaea in 325, which established the official doctrine of the Roman Empire and the Catholic Church. Lastly, we have the Suebi. In his 1st century chronicle, the Roman historian Tacitus made it very clear that the Suebi were not a homogeneous group of people, but a confederation of many different tribes occupying a large territory around the Elf River. Therefore, the Suebi did not have a strong ethnic identity like the Vandals or Visigoths, but many small groups joined them because they were more open compared to others. The Suebi who arrived in Hispania were not many, and were actually the smallest group, estimated to be around 25,000 people, with probably about 4,000 to 5,000 warriors. Although we do not have exact numbers of how many people entered the Iberian Peninsula in 409, estimates range between 100,000 and 150,000 people, of whom at most 30,000 to 40,000 were warriors, all in a population that in 5th century Hispania was around 4 to 5 million inhabitants. The Rebellion of Constantine III. Going back to the political history, Stilicho had no choice but to gather soldiers from all the provinces to deal with the threats already inside the empire. But this decision led to his downfall. The frontier soldiers and the Gallo-Roman and Romano-British elites felt abandoned by the court in Ravenna, the capital of the Western Roman Empire. This abandonment sowed the seeds of rebellion. In Roman Britain, the usurper Constantine III declared himself emperor in 407, presenting himself as the savior of the Romans abandoned by Honorius. His highly marketable name helped, because people still fondly remembered Emperor Constantine the Great, the first to convert to Christianity. Rebellions in Britannia had been common and generally insignificant, serving as a tool for provincial elites to claim more power within the Roman Empire. However, Constantine's rebellion took a different turn as he crossed the English Channel to Gaul. In Gaul, Constantine re-established control of the frontier and negotiated new treaties of alliance with the Franks and the barbarians who had not yet crossed the Rhine. He reached an agreement with the Burgundians to settle them in Germania Secunda, in the Netherlands, to prevent them from threatening the Rhone Valley. Due to his effectiveness in restoring order in Gaul, many Gallo-Romans supported him. Stilicho sent a Gothic chief to suppress Constantine's rebellion, but he failed, allowing Constantine to take Arles, the capital of the prefecture of Gaul. Meanwhile, Alaric wanted to form an alliance with Stilicho and secure a stable settlement, but due to the invasion of the Rhine coalition and Constantine's third revolt, the public treasury was empty. To put more pressure on the central government, Alaric moved his troops to northern Italy, prompting Stilicho to gather money from the Italians to meet Alaric's demands. The death of the Eastern Emperor led Stilicho, even in this dire situation, to focus more on intrigues than the barbarians, pressing Honorius to become the tutor of the new emperor. Stilicho's position became increasingly unstable, with more enemies due to his poor management of the borders. Finally, part of the army mutinied and captured and executed Stilicho. His great error was underestimating the barbarian threat to the Roman Empire, which is true that under normal circumstances would not have been so terrible. However, without an effective foreign policy to keep the barbarians divided and satisfied with tributes, the situation was very different from previous centuries. Alaric and the sack of Rome. Stilicho's execution was followed by the widespread massacre of the wives and children of the barbarians serving in the Roman army in Italy, similar to what had happened years earlier in Constantinople. As a result, many of the Germanic peoples under Roman service deserted and joined Alaric's Goths. Alaric's army grew from 20,000 to 30,000 men. Since the Western Roman army was mainly made up of barbarians, when many of them deserted, the Roman army was severely weakened. Alaric, again with a difficult legal situation and with unclear legitimacy, seems to have declared himself king of the Goths. With many new recruits needing food, the Gothic leader did not hesitate to attack Italy again, especially since the new strongmen in Ravenna refused to negotiate with him. With several tens of thousands of men, Alaric did not attempt to take the well-defended Ravenna, but headed for Rome. Rome was but a shadow of its former self, a city that had lost much of its population since the early Roman Empire, but it still held significant symbolic importance. The city had good defenses, but a small garrison and few resources to sustain a long siege. Alaric did not wish to sack Rome or appoint a new emperor. He wanted to be paid what he was owed to support his soldiers and their families. During the first siege, the Senate opted to pay a large sum of money to Alaric and his men to leave the siege, and Emperor Honorius committed to providing them with supplies. Additionally, they freed about 10,000 barbarian slaves, mostly former soldiers of Radagaisus, bringing Alaric's army to about 40,000 men on the move along with their families. But in the early months of 409, Honorius refused to fulfill the agreement and refused to appoint Alaric as supreme general in the Western Roman Empire, which would have turned him into a new Stilicho. Seeing his requests ignored, Alaric returned to Rome for the second time, joined by the army of his brother-in-law and future successor, Atulf. There, Alaric asked the senators to choose a new emperor, and they selected Priscus Attalus, who was the city's governor. With Italy devastated by wars and the entire prefecture of Gaul in Constantine III's hands, North Africa was the only way Italy could get food to supply the Goths. Priscus Attalus' failure to bring this province under his control sealed his fate. Alaric deposed him and attempted new negotiations with Honorius to address the basic needs of his people. When these negotiations also failed, Alaric's Visigoths prepared to take Rome once and for all. Someone opened the gates of Rome from within, and Alaric allowed his troops to sack Rome for 3 days to obtain resources, with the condition that they not attack churches or people taking refuge in them. Many historical and sacred objects ended up in Alaric's hands and the Visigothic treasury, and they took none other than Honorius' half-sister, Galla Placidia, captive. Despite this great symbolic victory, much of Italy was devastated, and the real wealth of the empire was in the province of Africa, modern-day Tunisia. Only by controlling the grain could Alaric ensure his power and the livelihood of his men and their families. So he moved his people to southern Italy and prepared ships to set sail. However, a storm destroyed his ships, and the Visigothic expedition was cancelled. Shortly after that, Alaric, the king of the Visigoths, died of fever before reaching the age of 50 and at the peak of his fame. From being an obscure Gothic chieftain, he became the leader and king of the largest barbarian army of his time within the Roman Empire's borders. Although they simply identified as Goths, it was under Alaric that the Visigothic identity started to form, and with his death, a new people emerged. Despite all his successes, Alaric ultimately failed in his ambitions to become the most powerful man in the Roman Empire and to secure the livelihood of his army and their families. The new king will be Atulf, Alaric's brother-in-law, who will lead the Visigoths to Hispania for the first time. The verdict. I know some on the far right compare our current times, which they see as decadent, to the crisis years of the Roman Empire before it vanished in Western Europe. However, this comparison doesn't hold up. First, thousands of people are not arriving all at once or as a cohesive group. In the illegal migrations that concern the far right, people come from different countries. Second, and most importantly, they are not organized military groups capable of replacing the elites of the country they migrate to, as happened during the migrations to the Roman Empire. The illegal and legal migrants who worry the far right take the least regarded and worst paid jobs. They are essentially the slaves of capitalism and globalization, not a threat to the state they moved to. Instead of criminalizing and blaming immigrants from poor countries, why not point fingers at the capitalists and states whose actions encourage these migrations? They do this for the double purpose of keeping wages low and dividing the working class with nationalism and racism. Please think about it. And with that, the verdict ends. If you like this episode, please like, comment, and share it. Subscribe to New History of Spain on podcast directories or on YouTube, where you will find more content aside from this chronological series, like videos on how the hordes of Madrid were key in freeing the Spanish capital from Allied occupation, or the stupid death that led to Franco's rise to power. Please consider joining the community of Patreons at patreon.com/newhistoryspain to help me continue with the show and gain exclusive benefits, such as 1 month of early access to these episodes of the main series. You have all the relevant links in the episode description. In the next episode I will cover the history of Hispania from 409 to 422. I will talk about the division of Hispania among the Vandals, Alans and Suebi, the arrival of the Visigoths with Atolf, and the beginnings of the Visigothic kingdom of Toulouse. Thank you for listening and see you soon!